Thank you for inviting me, Ajay, and it's a pleasure to be here. Let's just define the problem first, right? I think that those of us who live in a city, we have access to good healthcare. We have access to clinics, we have access to good hospitals. We have the ability to actually buy good health with the money that we have. But if you look at us as a country, majority of our population lives where we don't even have access to primary health care. Our villages, the towns, the nearest primary care clinic, there's some stats in the slides that I had, talk about how many people does one of these primary health care centers serves. How far is it for people to travel to try and get seen by a general practitioner, right? And so the reason this is important is because I think medicine becomes our first sort of order of response when we talk about healthcare quality, because 9 out of 10 times we just don't have the ability to actually go and see a physician if you live in rural India, unless we have the conveyance to be able to do that. Get on a bus, get ride for a few hours, go to the primary care clinic, which has its own challenges in terms of staffing, in terms of skill, in terms of availability of equipment to be able to diagnose. And as a nation, I think we are, hypochondriacs anyway. We buy medicine and pop it without even thinking about what it really means. And the proliferation of medical stores available in pretty much every small little town and village right now makes it so much easier for us to just go up to somebody and say, look, I need something. Sir dard ho raha hai, kuch de do. Right? And so medicine becomes really, really important for us, in terms of access to good quality medicine. And now, especially with what is happening with the government looking at, access to generic medicines through this large Jan Aushadhi program, it becomes even more important for us to understand quality of what we are actually, distributing to our people, right? And so with that as a context, I think, slides are back up. Let me see if I can get them slides. Yeah, so this is what I wanted to sort of talk about, but by no means, this is a set agenda. We'll talk whatever, you guys want to talk about. And I just mentioned to you, if you look at our public health sector, the first two pieces is where, majority of the work really happens. The primary healthcare centers and sub-centers, right? The hospitals and insurance schemes, those are all part of the larger program, but that's basically where it happens. And if you look at stats, a sub-center serves about 5,000 people in general in rural India. We have one primary health center for 30,000 people in rural health in plains and one for 20,000 people in hill and tribal areas. Basically what I'm trying to tell you here is that if you don't have access to good quality medicine, our healthcare is going to go down the drain. Plain and simple. Okay? Now, I'll stop here. I'm going to switch over to a video. It's a clip on YouTube, so we'll just listen to it for a few minutes and see if if you're able to just look at it, because I think it's a good conversation starter.
ये भी बता दें, ये भी आमिर यहाँ पर बिल्कुल साबित हो रहा है कि एक तो ये असर इस तरह से हो रहा है और दूसरा इस तरह से चाहे कितनी आलोचना हुई हो कुछ क्वार्टर्स में कि भाई सेलिब्रिटी हैं, फिल्म स्टार है, इसलिए बुला लिया स्टैंडिंग कमेटी में, लेकिन देश तक ये बात भी पहुंची कि कानून कैसे बनते हैं, स्टैंडिंग कमेटीज में क्या क्या बातें होती हैं, क्या क्या काम करते हैं हमारे सांसद और क्या प्रोसेस होता है। ये भी एक बहुत बड़ा असर हो गया मेरे हिसाब से। तो बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया आपका शांत कुमार जी हमारे साथ बने रहने के लिए। लेकिन अब हम बात करते हैं उस आलोचना की जो जेनरिक दवाइयों को लेकर अब शुरू हो गई है। पहले डॉक्टरों ने जो एक विरोध शुरू हुआ था कि आमिर खान जो है वो गलत प्रेजेंट कर रहे हैं, डॉक्टर सारे ऐसे नहीं होते, कुछ अच्छे भी होते हैं, वो उसका भी हमने जवाब दे दिया था और वो शो पे हमारी बात भी हुई थी। लेकिन अब कुछ ऐसे इस तरह की आलोचना आ रही है कि जेनरिक दवाइयों को इस तरह से जिस तरह से पेश किया जा रहा है वो सही नहीं है, पूरी तरह से सही नहीं है। उसमें ऐसा नहीं है कि जेनरिक दवा लिखने से ही सब कुछ ठीक हो जाएगा। तो वो उस आलोचना पर आप क्या कहेंगे? क्योंकि उनका कहना है कि ब्रांड जो होता है वो भरोसा देता है। ब्रांड क्यों होता है? ब्रांड इसीलिए होता है, भरोसा देता है। आप एक लोकल फोन ले लीजिए या ब्रांडेड फोन ले लीजिए, लोकल कंप्यूटर ले लीजिए, ब्रांडेड कंप्यूटर ले लीजिए, तो ये ब्रांड जो है ये भरोसा दिलाता है। दवाई में तो भरोसे की सबसे ज्यादा जरूरत है।
देखिए, जो लोग ऐसा कह रहे हैं वो दरअसल लोगों को गुमराह करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं।
लोग कह रहे हैं आप गुमराह कर रहे हैं,
वो गुमराह कर रहे हैं लोगों को। और वो लोगों के दिल में शक पैदा करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं, शंका पैदा करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं, जो बहुत ही गलत बात है। हम बड़े क्लियर हैं हमारे रिसर्च में, हमने क्या क्या हमारे सामने आया है। मैं आपको बता दूं कि ये देश का जो कानून है उसमें ये है कि आप अगर किसी का खून कर लें, मर्डर कर लें, तो शायद आपको सज़ा मिले ना मिले, क्योंकि कभी आप साबित नहीं कर पाएंगे कि मैंने खून किया, मैं बंदूक छुपा दूंगा, कुछ कर दूंगा, विटनेसेस जो हैं वो कन्वर्ट हो जाएंगे। लेकिन जब एक मैन्युफैक्चरर, एक फैक्ट्री या एक जो दवा बनाता है, जब वो अपनी फैक्ट्री डाल के दवा बनाता है, मैन्युफैक्चर करता है, जहां पर भी वो लेबोरेटरी में मैन्युफैक्चर करता है दवा, तब वो अपनी कंपनी के नाम से वो दवा बेचता है, चाहे वो ब्रांडेड हो या ना हो। दवा की पत्ती पे शायद वो ब्रांड का नाम ना हो,
लेकिन जब किसी कंपनी का,
मेरी कंपनी है, जो भी मेरी कंपनी XYZ कंपनी है, मैं होलसेल में ये इतने सारे
तो
दवा,
वो जोखिम लेता है।
मैं नहीं जोखिम नहीं, मैं आपको समझा रहा हूं कि वो दवा बेचता है, उसके पर्चे पे दवा बेच रहा है, उसकी जगह एड्रेस सबको पता है। कानून ये कहता है कि अगर आपने फेक दवा बना के बेची तो वो तो साबित हो जाएगा ना, आपने अपने पर्चे पे बेची, आपने आपकी फैक्ट्री है, आपकी जगह आप जहां बना रहे हैं, जहां से आप बेच रहे हैं, आप खुद, आपका सिग्नेचर है उस पे, इनवॉइस है, बिल्स हैं, वगैरह वगैरह। तो उस पे सजा क्या है मैं बताऊं? सजा क्या है? उम्र कैद की सजा है। तो कौन सा दवा बनाने वाला ये जोखिम उठाएगा कि उसको उम्र कैद की सजा हो जाए, जबकि ये पूरा प्रूफ हो सकता है। अगर वो किसी का खून करे तो प्रूफ भी शायद ना हो, लेकिन ये तो साफ प्रूफ वो खुद दे रहा है। दूसरी बात ही, अगर दवा में नहीं, मैं दूसरी बात बोलता हूं, अगर दवा में थोड़ी कमजोरी हो, मान लीजिए कि दवा फेक नहीं है लेकिन उसमें हल्की सी कमजोरी है,
उसका असर वैसा नहीं है,
असर उसका वैसा नहीं है। जैसे कि मैं एक एग्जांपल देता हूं उदाहरण के तौर पे, कि दवा होती है, उनकी एफिकेसी टेस्ट करते हैं। वो जैसे कि अगर एक दवा इतने मिनट में घुलती है, अगर उतने मिनट में नहीं घुलती, अगर 1 मिनट ज्यादा लेती है घुलने में, तो उसका असर जरा कम होगा, उसका पावर जरा कम होगा। अगर वो पावर और असर में अगर कम होती है, किसी मापदंड में भी वो कम साबित होती है।
Anybody going to jail for making substandard medicines? Oh, sorry. Have you heard of anybody actually going to jail for making substandard medicines? Mr. Khan is saying here that the law of this country actually puts people in jail for making bad medicines. Right? He goes on, so if you have time, it's about a 10-minute clip. It's worth watching. And the reason I thought this was really relevant is because awareness is such an important aspect of what is missing in what we do in our healthcare right now. Just before we started, we were just talking with Monica, and I just mentioned that an implicit contract between a patient and a doctor is that of trust. You go see a doctor when you're sick, when you're the most vulnerable at that point in time, right? And the assumption that you make there is the doctor is going to do the right thing for you, right? She's going to give you medicine, it's going to make you better. It's because of that implicit trust that we never actually question what the doctor is doing, right? I don't know how many of you, as I mentioned to you just before we got started, that I have had this experience where you've gone to a doctor, and my family has had this experience as well in India, where you go and you get medicine, and you go to the pharmacy and you get the prescription filled, and a couple of days later you don't feel better, you go back to the doctor, and the doctor says, look, I'm going to change your medicine. आपकी दवाई बदल देते हैं. कभी पूछा है आपने कि दवाई क्यों बदल रहे हो? Why is it that the doctor says that it's the same medicine that I'm going to give you but made by a different manufacturer? Why is it that we never ask this question? And for those of who live in this country earning 200 to 300 rupees a day, spending 20 to 30 or 50 rupees buying medicine, is that the first purchase, was that for charity? Are we giving that that money away to pharma companies for the things that don't work? Do you agree with me or not? I mean, silence is not going to help us, right? You're supposed to have a dialogue here, right? So when I watched this clip several years ago, what really bothered me was that there was really nobody that could counter what Mr. Khan was saying, and I don't believe he's a bad person, I'm not. But the point here is he's got a big bully pulpit, right? He's a big star in this country. When he says things like this, people believe it. And I wanted to actually find out for myself how many people actually went to jail for making substandard medicine. And that started a long process of filing RTIs with the government and figuring out what really actually happened. And in one of my blog posts, I think if you haven't read it, I suggest you read. I write a blog post every week now. In one of the blog posts that I've talked about, where I have actually provided evidence of case law, judgments in India where people convicted of manufacturing substandard drugs were convicted for the duration of the rising of the court. You know what that means? It basically means that you stand there until the judge rises from the chair and you're free to go. And all of these judgments are available on my website. I couldn't find one case where somebody who was convicted. Now imagine how difficult it is to convict somebody in this country. How poor are our investigative processes. And I've also written about that. When drug inspectors go pick up samples of medicines in the market and they send them to the central drug laboratories in Kolkata and Lucknow to get them tested, and they're found to be of substandard quality, a notification goes out saying, well, these are substandard drugs. We don't have a system in our country to withdraw those drugs from the market. We don't have a system where the central regulator tells the states, the pharmacies, we don't have an effective recall system in this country. So going back to the point that Mr. Khan is making here, the fact that he's saying that people can go to jail because they make substandard drugs, yes, the law certainly says that. Well, no, not really. I think the law is also screwed up because there are two different interpretations of the law. If you read the blog on judicial complicity, there is enough leeway there for advocates to argue one way or another here. And people just don't even get convicted. So if the deterrent to you is a slap on the wrist for making this kind of medicine, right? What stops you from doing this? You're from the Indian Statistical Institute, right? ISI? Oh, she is. Do you know that when they actually go and sample these drugs? So let me just talk a little bit about how we think about quality, right? Quality for us, under the current law, is measuring fitness for use of a finished product. So the way that we in this country measure quality is we send our inspectors to go buy the drugs from a chemist shop, send them over to the central drug laboratories, have them tested, and if the test comes out as a failure, we say this is of a bad quality drug. Now imagine what would happen to that drug when it's in that pharmacy at that point, right? Is there a statistical basis based on which you actually pick up your samples, right? So the first question we asked, of all the drug regulators is, how much money do you give your inspectors to go buy medicines? Obviously, they're not going to get them free of cost, right? So these inspectors ought to get some money from the budget. 80% of the state regulators have no clue of how much money actually is given to the inspectors. For those of them that actually have a clue are in southern India, Tamil Nadu and Kerala. They're given 35,000 rupees annually. Now you tell me, in 35,000 rupees, which cancer drug are you going to buy? What medicines are you going to test? You'll probably test antibiotics, some steroids, cough medicine. And these are the states that actually have budgets for sampling. Now, in the last 3 years, foreign regulators have banned 44 manufacturing facilities in India from exporting to their countries. Okay? And the reason why that has happened, and our regulator doesn't do anything like that, is because our law never requires us to think about quality as a part of the process. When these regulators come in and inspect our systems, quality for them is at every step you verify what you're doing, right? It's not just the product, because if you're measuring quality at the product level once it gets to the market, it's too late. People are already consuming that drug. And that is the reason why foreign regulators find problems with our manufacturing plants and our regulators happily sleeping, because the law doesn't work. There is no regulatory or legal requirement for us to be able to do this. And so going back to the point that I was trying to make to you is, even in those cases where through great effort we find these non-standard quality drugs, we do an investigation, we actually hold the company accountable for that. And there are a couple of instances on the blog that actually talk about this. There's a company called Alfred Berg, whose case I actually discuss in great detail. What they did was they were making a drug, for diabetes. In order to save money, they substituted, what is called an active ingredient of an expense. In order to save money, they took a cheaper version and put it in, substituted for an expensive version. Okay, and there is medical evidence that if you do that, elderly patients actually die. Now, in this case, culpability was proven beyond doubt. Beyond doubt. And guess what the sentence was? Rising, you're imprisoned until the rising of the court, and a 10,000 rupee fine. This is one of the unique cases where the process actually worked, but the judiciary let us down. So my point here is that systematically there are challenges all around. And the industry is extremely powerful. I'm sure Mr. Khan did all his research before he went on air, but I can tell you, there wasn't anything like what we have right now, 2 years worth of RTI work that has produced the kind of evidence that we went to the Supreme Court with when Mr. Khan actually did his interview. I hope he had access to this kind of information so he wouldn't actually give people the misinformation that he was giving at that point in time, 2 to 3 years ago. I'll stop here. I had slides, but those are just placeholders. Let's talk.
I'm very worried when you say that you need to study the process and not just inspect the outcome. I thought that there is a process which involves a great deal of wizardry, which requires expertise of people like you. Then at the end of that black box, some medicines come out. And if you can take a reasonable statistical sample, you get your quality control done. You know, yes, no, is this plant okay, is this plant not okay? Why do you say that this requires process audits every step of the way by the government agency? Why can the government agency not say, look, this is just a black box, I want to know that the black box is working?
You're absolutely right. So the two things that you said, one was if you have a sound statistical basis of evaluation, right, which we do not have today. Our sampling is completely nonsense. We don't even have sampling guidelines. You ask the regulator what your sampling guidelines are, they look at you like you're talking funny, number one. Number two, medicines are not consumer electronics. I'll tell you an example, okay? There was this medicine called, in India we don't do this, right? But in the US they're very particular. Maybe we do in India because we have our share of fairness creams. We use a lot of fairness creams in India. But in the US, kids actually, they break out acne, you have a lot of pimples on your face, right? Acne. Teenagers all do. My son's a teenager, he has acne right now. There's a medicine called isotretinoin. It's a very, very powerful medicine it was actually originally marketed by Roche, okay? The patent expired on that drug in 2003 or 4, I don't remember now. And a lot of Indian companies started making that. The drug is very difficult to formulate. And the reason it's difficult to formulate is because there are certain ingredients in that, if they're not suspended in that matrix in a certain way, they leach out, okay? And once they leach out, it creates a lot of metabolites once you take that drug. And one of the side effects of that is suicidal ideation. Kids, with suicidal thoughts. It's a very powerful thing, right? If you don't monitor intermediate steps until you get to the final product, you'll miss that aspect of it.
So you're saying that by looking at the final product, it is impossible?
It is not possible.
Ouch.
Even for, now I'm talking about chemicals molecules right now, which is by and large our drug supply. Imagine biological drugs. These are live cultured, right? It is live proteins, biomolecules. The eventual drug, there is no similarity between what we think about our branded innovative drug. That's why they're called biosimilars. They're not called identical generic medicines to biological molecules. Process is the product.
How does high ambient temperature change some of these questions?
It does. It does.
So I was thinking question one, that if you don't have a cold chain, that must inherently degrade a lot of the drugs, and plausibly the manufacturer could say it's not my fault.
No. So
okay, but second part, that when the sample of drugs is sent by the inspector to a lab in Lucknow, is this by refrigerated parcel, or is the degradation happening in transit?
very good question. Again, so these are very valid questions that you're asking. How do you know when you go buy a medicine, it says manufactured, August of 2013, expiry August of 2018. How do they know that it expires August of 2018?
Based on the temperature.
No, it's based upon some testing that they have done, right? And the thinking there is that if you've packed that in a foil, right, not in a bottle, because remember bottles sometimes have amber color because the drug is photosensitive. That's why it's in an amber colored bottle. If you packed it in a foil, the expectation is at room temperature the drug is stable, right? Before you actually get an approval for the drug, right, you're supposed to actually prove to the regulator that your formulation stays stable.
When you say room temperature,
yeah.
Is this room temperature done in the West where it's 25 degrees,
No.
or is it done in India at 42 degrees of fresh?
So there are multiple testing standards, right? India, Africa fall under what are called zone 4 conditions, which are extremely hot, sometimes arid and humid conditions. So the medicine that is sold in India is supposed to be tested against the conditions that exist in India, not the condition that exists in North America. When you put that label, print that on the label, the expectation is the regulator has verified that your formulation is stable in a hot, billy, summer. It stays good for the period of 2 years that the label actually says. Let me tell you something. In India, our law says that a drug that has never been used in our country, it's called a new drug. Okay, we've never seen that drug in this country. It's called a new drug, and the jurisdiction of that new drug is the central regulator, the CDSCO. Okay, 4 years to the date that the drug is actually introduced in India, it is no longer a new drug at that point. Okay, and it becomes the remit of state regulators. The central the nonsense that we are having, that arguing in the FDC issue that we are arguing in the Delhi Supreme Court and the Chennai Supreme Court right now, it's precisely this. 4 years after the introduction of this drug, the central regulator has no control over what the drug actually is. Now, that's one aspect of it. The second aspect of it is, even when you make a generic drug, right, there is some science to making that drug, right? In order to get an approval, even for our generic drug in the West, you have to perform what are called biostudies, which is basically you take healthy people, half of them, you don't give them the drug, the other half you give them the drug, or half of them you give the innovative drug that you're comparing, your drug to, the other half of them you give this drug, statistically, figure out what kind of sample that you want to look at, and you want to see that the blood profile. So when you take the drug, it goes into your gut, it gets dissolved in your stomach acid, it goes into your blood, right? And you take the blood out, you go to a path lab, you draw blood, you can monitor how much chemical is in your blood. The profile of the drug at certain points in time, so when you take it first, obviously it's going to be very high, right? Over a period of time, because you drink water, through urine it goes out, the concentration drops. That's the reason why doctors say, सवेरे भी दवाई लेनी है, शाम में भी लेनी है, क्योंकि सवेरे वाली दवाई शाम तक खत्म हो जाती है अपनी बॉडी में, right? The point here is that there is a method to this madness when you formulate drugs. In India, there is no requirement for the state regulators to even ask to prove the to the manufacturer that your drug actually works in the clinic. I can go in the basement of my garage, put a tablet punching machine, buy API from China, punch tablets, get it out to the market if I have a good marketing guy. There is no requirement in India today for any drugs that are approved by the state regulators to prove that your medicine actually works. Can you believe that? It's only that the central regulator, when it's called new medicines. And even those regulators, if you read the 59 Standing Committee of Parliament on the Rajya Sabha's Committee on Health, the kind of approvals that they have given, this is what the committee called them: incompetent, collusion, corruption. People don't know what they're doing. They've got letters of recommendations from 4 hospitals in 4 different parts of the country, exactly the same, wording. How is it possible the doctor? First of all, doctors don't write. I don't know if you can read your prescriptions. I can't read my prescriptions. How is it possible that 4 doctors, apparently eminent doctors, write exactly the same recommendation and sign all of those things? And when the parliamentary committee headed by Brijesh Pathak started asking questions, the files were missing. Well, when files go missing, the Central Information Commission says you have to file an FIR. So we asked the CDSCO, say, can we get a copy of the FIR did you file when the approvals that the Parliamentary Standing Committee said that you gave them illegally? Oh, we're working on it. We don't know where they are.
Okay. You said 44 factories in India have been proscribed by foreign regulators.
Enjoined by, yeah.
Are these like large famous companies we have heard of? Are these obscure unknown manufacturers?
Very good question. Wockhardt, Lopin, not Cipla, IPCA, Sun Pharmaceuticals, Ranbaxy, Dr. Reddy's Lab, Aurobindo Pharma, Alembic. You want me to go?
Now, if I was the US FDA, I would have a level of punishment that was bad enough to hurt.
Absolutely.
So why are these firms making these mistakes? What am I not getting? Once the inspection regime is in place, and we do have a couple of examples where sanctions have been applied, why are for-profit businesses not getting the point and investing in safety?
Because we have gotten used to working in an environment that doesn't hold anybody accountable, because we still think that we can get away with it.
If the US FDA imposes a sufficiently horrible fine, and it bubbles up all the way to the board of directors and to the principal shareholders, does this not hurt?
It is beginning to hurt. Now, what has happened is that unfortunately, what the FDA has done, what the EMEA has done, is begin to bite, finally, the top and bottom lines, which basically has meant that they have now segregated manufacturing facilities to say, these facilities that we use to sell into Europe and US, we will comply. And they have. They have been upgrading their facilities. They have been trying to put processes in place. They have been hiring qualified people to do the work that they are. Unfortunately, that is not spilling over to manufacturing facilities that cater to our market, to the African market, to the Latin American market.
So you just answered what was intended as my next question, that can we free ride on the work of the US FDA by purchasing medicines from firms who are exporting to the United States and in the last 2 years have not had horrible fines and punishments by the US FDA?
There's only one company that I know of, a big company, not small mom-pop stores, that is not on the US FDA warning list. So the answer to the question that you're asking, the only way to solve this is to have a good regulator in this country. If you can make good medicine to export, why can you not make good medicine for our people here? That's the only answer. Fix the regulator. Get the regulator to work properly. All of these things will go away.
Is it the big companies and their powers that prevents? And like you talked about the judiciary that betrayed us, or here either there's no interest in regulation, and we see that across many fields, that the state capacity is limited, there isn't a lot of political will, or in this case, is it also that the regulated will be very
of course. You see what's happening. You see what's happening in Delhi High Court with the small sliver of the FDC issue, right? The fixed dose combination issue that's being litigated in the court right now. Okay, so here's the issue. So what is?
Tell us your litigation story.
Sure. Let me answer the question that she asked, and then I'll tell you what happened there, right? So what happened over the last 20, 30 odd years, right? We as a country have developed this habit of trying to outperform our next door neighbor, right? So if two medicines work independently, right? I can make the medicine, you can also make the medicine because there's no barrier to entry here, you know. Making medicines here is very, very cheap. So then the question is, how do you sell your stuff more than I do? I have to come up with something new. Well, we don't do research in this country. We absolutely do not. We haven't had a single new drug. Ranbaxy will say that they discovered malaria molecule. That's a different story. Okay?
It's cheaper to do research also. Why don't we do that?
Because we don't have the capacity to. Our investment time horizon is 2 years. People who invest in India want return in 2 years. Discovering medicines doesn't happen on that timeline.
You don't come in and do it here.
Of course they do. But the thing is, you know, the large companies, the global multinational companies that do a little bit of research here, it becomes a part of their overall portfolio. I'm talking about Indian companies doing research here, right? We don't do research here, we just copy. That's in our DNA. The point I'm trying to make here is, the question you asked is, what are fixed dose combinations? How do I get my detail to go to a doctor and say, Doctor Sahab, ye nayi dawai hai, acha kaam karti hai. So I put those two drugs together and make a new drug out of it. A lot of times, these drugs were completely different. One was for pain, the other one was completely different indication. This has been going on for 30 odd years. The CDSCO finally put together an expert committee. It was called the Katoj Committee. And they looked at, you know, thousands of these drugs and came up with a short list. My public interest litigation went for admissions hearing on 10th of March, I think. I don't remember the exact date. The justice, you know, basically said that he didn't want to hear it. The following day, the CDSCO bans 344 of these irrational combinations of drugs.
Section 500 times.
I don't
know
know.
if that was on the list, but it's one of them.
Right? Because we do not have in our law the ability to withdraw drugs from the market. Our drug regulation was written in 1940s, before we became independent. Okay? And we've never caught up to what real science is. We've been putting band-aids after band-aids on this regulation. The prayer that I went to the Supreme Court with a lot of data is that this patchwork nonsense of trying to fix 1, 2, 3 will never work. Because for every issue, there are three vested parties behind it. The fixed dose combination is just a very small part of the issue that we are dealing with. And look what the pharma company is doing right now. They know they are actually on very solid ground, because there is nothing in the law that allows the CDSCO to withdraw drugs from the market. Nothing. It is quite possible that once you launch the drug in a market, you will see things that you will not have seen when the drug is being developed, because you test it on a very small number of people in clinical studies. When the drug is in the market, you see a much larger usage of the drug. You may see things that you've never seen in the clinic. You have to have the ability of taking something back from the market.
Just for my clarity, are you referring to something like the US FDA adverse reactions database?
Correct.
Or do drug makers also run these systems in parallel?
They should. Adverse events database is one aspect of the surveillance system, right? Adverse events database contains individual reports. So doctors, in order to continue, keeping their license, are supposed to call an 800 number and report what actually happened there. The FDA uses that as one aspect of the data. In addition to that, our own manufacturers, the big name companies here, right? They file what is called an annual product quality report, which is a report of all the batches that we have manufactured in the last year. How many of those batches have tested out to specification? Because you know exactly what the specification ought to be. When we look at medicines, right, this is what we look for: identity, purity, strength, and quality. And I'm not even talking about the excipients, I'm talking about the active ingredients there. Each of these actually has a number against it. So when you test it, it's supposed to be in that range. If it falls out of that range, you're supposed to do something about it, right? If a big company like Dr. Reddy's Labs making a drug called omeprazole Let's talk about omeprazole in a minute. Thousands of batches every year, right? You're supposed to actually study that over a period of a year, statistical quality control over all of these samples to figure out if there is a trend. You marry that data with the individual case reports that you see, the signaling information that you get, and then you come up with a product profile, the product safety profile of the product. You don't have systems like that. Now, let me give you an example. We're talking about omeprazole, something came to my mind. I don't know how spicy do you guys eat, but I know whenever I visit here, my family, they eat a lot of spicy food. And my problem is that I get this thing called acid reflux, heartburn we call it, right? If I eat something, if I don't have the heat in the afternoon, I get acid reflux. If you do get that, you go to a doctor, you probably get a proton pump inhibitor. The most common thing that you get here is something called ranitidine. Okay? Now think about this. That drug, it says take it half hour before you consume food. Typical, heartburn medicines, whether it's liquid, Digene, or ranitidine, it'll say half an hour before you consume food. If the drug is not formulated properly, what the drug does, it actually coats the lining of esophagus so that it doesn't, cause heartburn to you if you take it in the right time. If the drug is not formulated properly, that coating doesn't exist, right? You will have heartburn. You'll continue taking that medicine. 3 months later, you go back to the doctor, and the doctor says you have an ulcer in your stomach. Do we have systems to track any of this stuff? What happened? You went from getting a heartburn to getting an ulcer. And for no fault of yours, you're following the doctor's orders. Look at this chart. This is a drug called streptokinase, and I'm not wearing my glasses, so forgive me. This is a paper that I'm quoting there. There are several samples from India. Look at on the left side, where you see 100 to 90%, potency of that drug, all the way to the back there, where you see India and China. It's the same bloody formulation. It's the same drug. If you buy it in the West, you get 100% potency of the drug. You buy it in India, you get 50%. This is what is happening. You know why? What is happening?
And what causes this difference? The processes were not followed.
Absolutely. Processes not being followed. You don't put the right amount of API in it. You try to cut corners. You don't have the science. You just tell people that you are able to make that drug, and the regulator doesn't really know right from left. This is the biggest problem that we're going to have. This is what happens when you don't take proper antibiotics. Antibiotic resistance is becoming a huge issue in this country right now. If the potency of the drug is below what the lower level that's shown there, the pathogen in your body, whether it's bacteria or virus, it mutates and stops working with normal, strong antibiotics, the erythromycins, azithromycins. We are beginning to prescribe the most powerful antibiotics in this country to treat benign infections today, because none of our antibiotics are working. Can you imagine what this is going to look like 10 years down the road?
I have a question. All of this, how complicit are the doctors? So maybe the
They
doctor
are.
also doesn't know sometimes.
No. So I've spoken to the physicians, right? Here is the problem. Among the samples that we have done, 90% of the hospitals have physicians' compensation linked to some level of prescriptions. Okay? This is a problem. If you don't prescribe enough, it affects, your take-home pay. There's a problem here. I'm not taking this away, okay? Physicians ought to know, they should know, they ought to know that, this is what is really happening. Unfortunately, there's a financial incentive there.
Even your sort of primary healthcare centers or these clinics that you go to on the street.
Yeah.
You would think that there also there is.
I don't have data to comment one way or another. I have data on hospitals, but I don't have data on individual clinics at the moment.
Should we let you walk through slides, or should we
Right.
keep
So
going?
I was just, sort of I just want to make two points here, and then we'll just stop, and then we'll continue talking about it. This is data from one of the research papers came out of one of the think tanks here in Delhi. This is, on the left is essentially the testing that is being done, and the right is the percentage of drugs that actually failed. Assay is essentially how potent your drug is. 25% of our drugs in 2004 and 2013 and 14 were of substandard quality. 1/4. And it's the same thing in armed forces, our army, when they procure drugs. If you read the procurement report, 33% of the drugs are of substandard quality. Today we got a report from Western Railway that talks about what their testing is. I have to read it. I haven't gotten around to doing it. 1/4 of our drug supply suspect. This is where we need to be. Look, this chart is actually very important. Again, forgive me, I can't read from here because I'm not wearing my glasses, but if you see medicine quality there, look at Asia and look at Latin America and look at Western countries. Where is the level of concern there? That's where we need to be. That's the future for us. That's where we need to be as a country. Go on.
So, I keep wondering where the pressure for change is going to come from. So, as we were talking before, this,
People.
So, call drops, for example, is a huge irritant, and that makes tribe want to do something about
People. You and I we need to start asking questions. Yeah.
What were the reasons given by Supreme Court in rejecting the claim? Did it give any reason?
So,
can you tell us the full story of your litigation?
Sure. So, after the Ranbaxy news broke, programs like this, went out there and started saying, there's nothing wrong with the drug supply. And it was difficult for me to offer a counter argument because I had no data. I mean, I stand up and say something against Amir Khan, who's going to believe me, right? So I had to actually, collect data. So I went to, in 2014, I went to Dr. Harshvardhan. He was recently elected as the Minister of Health. And after great difficulty trying for 3 months, I finally secured an appointment. I went to see him. And he wasn't particularly interested in what I had to say. And I tried to tell him, look, this is a problem. We got to do something. He just gave me 5 minutes and he was distracted at that point in time as well. He asked me to give it in writing, which I wrote a letter to him documenting all of the things that I was worried about, but never heard back from him. He got transferred to Ministry of Science and Technology, so it was no longer his problem, so that's fine. I ended up talking to a number of people, retired bureaucrats, and people who work in the NGOs, and I said, look, this is a problem. In India, when we talk about medicines, there are two very powerful groups. Okay, there is this group that speaks about pricing, because we have price controls in this country. The industry is very unhappy about it. They are the ones who talk about pricing. Then there's another group that actually is very interested in access. These are the non-governmental organizations. They just believe that they need to get medicines to the people as quickly as possible. Noble goal, right? Their issues are with IP, intellectual property, compulsory licensing. All of these things are essentially their remit. Between these two guys, quality becomes an orphan. Nobody cares about quality. What good is it if you get medicine to people who need it and it's bad quality medicine? Coming back to the point I was trying to make here is that after talking to a whole bunch of people, we realized that the only way to try and counter this nonsense is with data. So we've assembled a team of lawyers. We worked for 2 years. We filed over 125 RTI applications. Now it's about 150 right now. And we started collecting information. We got the usual runaround, one office, transferring RTI application to another office, denying information on the grounds that it is, this, that, and the other, proprietary nature, this, that, and the other. But over 2 years, we collected enough information, and what emerged out of that was a complete dysfunctional picture. And if you read my blogs, every week I write about one issue that I was hoping that we would make an argument in the court. And then what we did was, my counsel was Raju Ramachandran, who was a constitutional lawyer. And we got together and we had a brainstorming session saying, how do we now address this thing? And the outcome of that discussion was that if you try and do it in a patchwork way, this is never going to work, because it's like house of cards. You take one piece out, something will fall down, and the industry is so strong here. So the way that we thought about doing this was, we looked at the law. The law was written in 1940. And the law basically said, at that point in time, there were no states, right? There were provinces, princely states and provinces. The law was written in a way that the central government, which was a viceroy at that point in time, had delegated, the parliament had delegated to the executive to say, look, you put a structure in place for the country. After independence, what happened was the executive subdelegated that to the states. There is nothing in our law today that actually allows the center to subdelegate that to the states. That was a technicality. So we went to the Supreme Court arguing the law doesn't actually allow you to create the structure that you've created. That was one PIL. The second PIL was a lot of transactional stuff, the kind of stuff that I talked to you about, which is we don't have a recall system. States don't ask for proof before they approve medicines. The CDSCO, basically, we don't have a appropriately qualified drug controller. We just don't have one. Our drug controller is a pharmacy graduate. What we need is a public health individual to understand what really is happening in the country. So this laundry list of things. When the hearing, so the petition was filed in January of this year. It came up for hearing in March. And we had anticipated, this was the first question that would come up, is my standing, because I'm not an Indian citizen, I'm a US citizen. So the first question would have come up was, what is your standing? What makes you bring this case? What is your standing? So we had prepped for this. When predictably, the judge asked the first question was, who are you? Why are you here? You're not a citizen of this country. And so my attorney, Raju Ramachandran, who's a constitutional lawyer, he read him the articles of citizenship, and he also told him, I pay taxes in this country. As a non-resident Indian, I've been paying taxes for a long time. We've given me a copy of my PAN card and tax documents as well. So that addressed that particular issue. That went away at that point in time. The second issue so once that went away, I wasn't there in the court, I was in the US at that time. I got a call from my lawyer like at 2 a.m. in the morning. The comment that was made was, well, we are too busy. There are people languishing in jails. We just don't have time for this academic issue. At that point in time, my attorney basically said, Judge, you're being very uncharitable about it. Allow us to withdraw this petition so that we can approach other jurisdictions that to try and seek justice for it, and he allowed us to do that. The court order is available on my blog site as well. That is what had happened.
So on this recall and withdrawal issue, are you distinguishing the power to prohibit completely, because the Drugs and Cosmetics Act does have a provision saying the central government can prohibit a drug in public interest, as opposed to recalling a particular batch? Is that a distinction you're making?
So I think what I'm asking for is not a recall in the way it's done right now. I'm asking for a nationwide recall. India is one market. If you find an NSQ drug in Karnataka, probability is that batches of the drug is also in Orissa, in Bihar, and Uttar Pradesh as well. We have no system today. If the state controller of Karnataka says, sends a message to local pharmacies saying this drug needs to come off the shelves, that people in Bihar, people in Jharkhand know what the heck is going on. Look, we know where drugs are manufactured, right? It's Andhra, Telangana now, Uttarakhand, and Himachal. This is where most of our drugs come from, right? There is no accountability. If inspector finds a not of standard quality drug in Tamil Nadu, the most an inspector can do is call up the his counterpart in Uttarakhand and say, do something about it. And guess what? How empowered the Uttarakhand guy is going to be to try and prosecute industry that is actually generating revenue for the state there. That is a problem.
So do you see more centralization of the whole regulatory structure as the solution to this?
If India is one market, why do we have 35 regulators?
We're just stuck with our constitutional scheme.
But see, the thing is, there are certain areas where that makes sense. Why don't we have 35 tries? Right?
Would enforcement be an issue
With what?
in terms of checking?
It is an issue. Enforcement is absolutely an issue because
That could be done better at the center.
see, there are lots of these little things that we can do better. right? I mean, one of the first things that the CDSU said, we are ill-equipped, we don't have the capability, we don't have the manpower, we can throw money at it. I'm not saying that money is not going to solve the problem. What is it that we want? Do we want incremental improvements?
So we've been working, this whole team worked for 3 years on a new financial sector regulatory law. And after, and then realized that the political establishment doesn't have the will to do it.
Correct.
So in this world of patchworks, could it be that suppose there was somebody in the system who wanted to, given the law, because changing the
Sure.
law is a very,
Agreed.
Sahara,
Agreed.
first the government, then
Agreed.
Sahara,
Agreed.
it's a big deal.
Great.
The law certainly might be.
Yeah.
Is there something within the current law
Yeah.
that suppose one tried to move?
There are. Look. I can tell you there have
Is
been.
there a program for change
Yeah.
where on one hand we work on state capacity and better execution of existing laws,
Yes.
and in parallel we do drafting of high quality laws and we build
Correct.
an advocacy program
Absolutely.
surrounding that. So as Ela was saying, we've lived this kind of process in finance.
Yep.
The kind of hostility that comes back from the establishment is unbelievable. I'm sure you've experienced
Absolutely.
it. So 95% of the journalists who cover finance
Right.
are extremely careful about criticizing the existing financial
True.
regulators.
True.
And the way you get blitzed in the media when an actual proposal shows up is unbelievable.
Yep.
So
Yep.
there is a real problem out there
Yep.
on the public policy process. And it's not easy to take on
I
the
agree.
establishment. That doesn't mean we should not do it. I'm just thinking,
I-
how should we strategize?
No, but I mean, here there are good examples here. So, for example, I'll tell you, right? There have been 3 expert committee reports: the Mashalkar committee report, the Katoj committee report, and the Ranjit Rai Chaudhary committee report. Okay, I think these 3 reports of the Ministry of Health Commission are actually provide a blueprint to do things within the confines of the current law. The problem is we constitute these committee reports and we conveniently file them in a corner someplace and do nothing about it.
Sounds again so much like finance.
Now, these committee reports, they are about executive functions at the state government or the central government? Or
Both. I mean, so if you look at the Mashalkar committee report, it addresses some issues in the center, it addresses some issues in the states, it talks about better coordination among states. So does the Ranjit Roy Chaudhary committee report. The problem is not commissioning these are learned men, extremely capable, right? Ranjit Roy Chaudhary is no longer with us anymore, but I mean, Mashalkar is, and he's a very, very learned man. If you commission somebody like that to actually give you input, take it at least, right, and do something about it. Don't just file it away, in the corner someplace.
So the resistance would come from the companies?
It would. It absolutely would.
And that would lower the, let's just say it's
Dilute it,
governments,
yes.
As you said, Uttarakhand,
Right.
Telangana,
Right.
whatever. So
right.
the state governments would not have the political will to do
Correct.
some of these things. Now the benefits are going to be all over the country.
Correct.
And the state government is, in general, trying to fight the next election.
Right.
No, Hila, if one state government does a better job of drug quality,
Yeah.
its people benefit.
Correct.
And the costs
That-
are
that
imposed
was
on
my question.
many factories who are outside the state. So it's actually quite easy for the
So
state government.
if the country's factories are concentrated in 3 states, then the benefits are very thinly spread across the country.
It is. And so there are 2 issues, right? I mean,
Can I
sorry,
just
go
add
on.
to that, right? If people don't know that they are suffering, how do they know that they are not suffering?
Or when they benefit.
Exactly. So
When they
you know how to
benefit.
know that
So
they
for me personally, the Ranbaxy case was a real eye-opener. I used to be complacent, thinking that, hey, Indian generic drug manufacturers are good enough to export into some of the most tough quality-conscious jurisdictions of the world.
Right.
Therefore, when I buy DPCO price-controlled medicines in India, broadly I'm okay.
Right.
And
Right.
I have a PhD in economics to show,
Right.
but I had not understood the basics of this until a couple of years ago, when the entire Ranbaxy story unfolded. So in this sense, I think most people simply don't know that they are being scammed in this.
and related to this, one of the points you made was that the agent of change is going to be us. So when people know that there is a problem. So in terms of investments, what does it take if one of us had to send our inspectors and take samples from chemist shops in Delhi and go test them? What is the investment required for testing?
So there have been studies done. I could tell you there have been There's these two guys who, rightfully or wrongfully, they get labeled as right-wing guys. Roger works for American Enterprise Institute, a right-leading think tank. They've done studies of samples that have been collected here, analyzed somewhere else. Amir Atran is a professor of medicine and law at University of Ottawa. He's currently, in the process of applying for a Wellcome Trust grant, essentially to do exactly this, right? The testing is going to be done outside of India. We'll sample based on a statistical, plan. We'll collect medicines, sample it, because I don't trust the CDSO numbers. So, to tell you what will it take, buying medicine is easy. I can walk up to anywhere and buy that, right? It's a chain of custody for you to be able to prove that the medicine was, treated properly, the analysis that needed to be done, properly in order to do that, and representative samples across the country. We can't just sort of focus on, that's where the statistics becomes really important. So there is a study, there's a grant currently, being written right now to do this, which is what those guys are doing. What I'm doing is this on this trip, essentially trying to meet with media houses. I've met with most of them on this trip, trying to bring this attention to the knowledge of editorial staff, so that please think about this. This is a big issue. It's a complex issue. It's not easy for me to give you a bite in 2 minutes to be able to explain to you what's really going on, but it has a very large impact on public health in India. This is what I'm trying to do. So, it's a multi-pronged approach. But the point you're making, which is find a state where you can find a committed chief minister and use that state to actually prove that, you can improve the quality of medicine. If you can do that.
If Maharashtra was to go after this, even if all the factories are in Uttaranchal, Himachal Pradesh.
There's some in Maharashtra as well.
Okay, fine. So even if Karnataka was to go after this.
Do they have control over factories that are in other?
No, not other states.
The point is the political economy works because they don't care.
Yeah.
So if they want to inflict pain on a factory in Uttarakhand, it's easier for Karnataka to do that. It's a bit like the political economy of the US FDA lashing out at Ranbaxy. It's beautiful. Whereas if the factory was in the United States, there'd be a more complicated political economy of lobbying by Ranbaxy to try to influence the Senate committee that the FDA deals with. There would have been the normal corruption of the regulatory process in the US. Whereas it's very beautiful when the factory is in India, then it's far easier for the FDA to be tough. So in similar fashion, perhaps the fragmentation into states may help us to get a few high-profile enforcement activities going, which could actually be wonderful for raising awareness and just waking up everybody from this complacence. So I wanted to push on two ideas. Hypothetically, suppose Karnataka goes all Nazi about measurement of quality and enforcement and all that. Then maybe actually people from Gujarat drive over to the border in Maharashtra to buy alcohol. Like that, maybe people from Gujarat will drive over to Karnataka to buy their medicines. Okay, and that would be quite amazing. When we fly to Bangalore, we would fill our prescriptions before we come back.
Will the results be that visible?
No, so it's
could we just can we fantasize?
Like anything else, right? There is some amount of fact and some amount of PR in here, right? Facts, I think, are going to be long because you can't observe outcomes in 3 months, 6 months and say, oh, our medicines have gotten better, so we're all feeling healthy, this quickly. It doesn't work that way, right?
My second question was about the DPCO.
So why would Karnataka care then, if the results are not visible?
They will.
Our job as intellectuals to persuade Karnataka that having more purity of amoxicillin matters.
If we can persuade them to care, then that also helps. So if
but
are
these programs
reasons why they might care.
See, Rajasthan today, they don't have any facilities, manufacturing facilities, but they have a publicly funded medicines program. So we were thinking about, potentially approaching Rajasthan and Bihar. Bihar is another example where you have a progressive chief minister, right? And they don't have any facilities there, right? And so all states have, so it's a question of fortifying the local regulatory capability in order to prove. Now we have to come up with indicators of outcomes, that you can now, politicians can go talk about this, right? So it's a longer term advocacy process, but you are looking at Rajasthan and Bihar as two states and basically
even if you think of the sloganeering of a chief minister, if the chief minister is able to say that before I started, a quarter of the medicines you were buying were fake.
Yeah.
So this is not fake. This is substandard.
Substandard.
Fake is very easy to,
I'm now
fake is
dramatizing.
easy.
Yeah,
but,
yeah, yeah.
No, but,
Yeah.
but you know, fake is simple and easy. It's a crime. It's simple. This
Agreed.
is not even a crime, right?
Okay, so can I go? To what extent is DPCO a problem? Because my understanding is that the department looks at normative estimates of the cost of production from existing facilities.
They do.
Now, if the existing facilities have been cutting corners on quality control, then that creates a normative price for the drug, which
Correct.
an
Correct.
honest business can possibly not match.
And that has been the number one excuse for cutting corners.
Okay.
Okay?
But then intrinsic to our program of changes, we have to question the structure of DPCO.
We have to. We have to.
My third question was that if we live in a world where we are willing to pay 100x the price of tap water to buy
This.
bottled water,
Yeah.
could there be another line of attack where there is a firm, an organization, a standards body, something which manages to gain legitimacy and trust in the eyes of a few consumers, okay? Maybe the very rich 0.5% of the country who probably spend 5% of the overall budget, where you pay more for high purity drugs.
Can I add to this? So there is this NABH
Yeah.
certificate.
Yeah.
There is an NABH certification.
Correct.
And some of the hospitals which
Correct.
NRIs go to
Correct.
try and get
Correct.
that, or they get the American.
That's the thing. The easiest thing is to do is to go actually buy American drugs, which beats the point.
No, so the American certification, and the reason they do that is to impress the
Medical tourism.
Or the rich of India as well.
Yeah, maybe.
So,
Yeah.
you know, perhaps that's the point, that if you have this certification maybe,
Yeah.
where some
Yeah. So,
people would be willing to pay extra, he would, I'm sure, pay extra. right?
but the thing is, if you understand quality, right? So,
Purity drugs.
yeah.
So similarly, there are many hospital firms who are really pushing on medical tourism. Now, hypothetically, imagine if
Yeah.
there is a great wave of awareness about this,
Correct.
including back in the United
Yes.
States.
Yes.
That you know what, when you go to a hospital in India
Right.
and
You're
they're going
exposed
to
to
stick
an IV.
anesthesia
Yeah.
drug into you,
Yeah.
there is a
Yeah.
20% chance that the drug is actually not effective enough, and you will feel the electric saw cutting open your ribcage. That can't be
No, it
very
can't be.
nice propaganda. So the hospital firms who are keen on medical tourism should be maniacal about creating their own internal quality assurance frameworks, whereby they are not just uncritically buying drugs made by Ranbaxy in facilities which are not being used to sell drugs into the United States.
I agree. I think these are all good ideas. I think that, I certainly haven't explored all of them. I think, part of, now that the Supreme Court has said no, I have to look at other options. And then these are all good options to see what can we do to try at least raise awareness. Because unless we start asking questions, it's going to be very hard to make any substantive change, aka the call drop issue with trial. So.